I can see these systems of ideas that are at war, right? There are systems of ideas at war. And the system of ideas that's on the woke side is the meta-Marxism of the postmodernists, right? Everything's a victim-victimizer narrative. It's an all-devouring ideology that grants moral propriety to its upholders. It's an unbelievably dangerous enterprise, but it is impersonal in some ways, in that if you have 100 radicals, they all have the same idea. And so it's not them, it's and that means that the proper level for the battle is philosophical or theological or spiritual or ideational or psychological rather than physical. Maybe it's only when you lose the battle that you have to resort to physical means. You also talked about the utility of humor.
But I just quickly, let me just lob something in there. I've been in court the last 10 days over a libel trial, and I watched everybody who was against me, who tried to destroy my life. That's what they've done. And I thought, I'd really like to go out for a beer with you guys. Because aside from this one little kind of crazy woke thing where you're completely right about everything and you're a total moral supremacist and I'm wrong and I need to educate myself, aside from that one pervasive and albeit deadly character flaw, I'd really like to go out for a beer with you. And I have a strong feeling that none of them would like to go out for a beer with me.
No, I think that's a really good observation, because when I was surrounded by screeching, harpy students, and often female, and then their idiot male enablers who were generally psychopaths, what I kept remembering was, well, you're 19. If I was at a dinner party at your parents' house, I would probably think that you were a pretty decent young person with some crazy ideas, rather than that you're just an absolute bloody serpentine mess of crazy ideas with a tiny bit of good person associated. It's not like that at all. And I've thought about this too, sort of technically speaking, is that Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist, he noted that you get a bunch of kids together and they could play a game coherently according to a coherent set of rules. But if they were young enough, if you separated them and asked them what the rules were, you got wildly disparate accounts. So together, they could play the game because each of them had fragmentary knowledge of the game, but as a unit, all the knowledge was there. It's sort of like a group of 100 university protesters, is that because there's 100 of them, the whole bloody pathological principality is there. But in each person, they're like 10% possessed, right? And so maybe what you do when you don't hate the person is that you have the possibility of separating the wheat from the chaff. What you would hope for your would-be ideological enemy is that free expression of idea in genuine dialogue would free them from the grip of their possession. And then you'd have another useful person around, which seems to be a lot better than, well, the potentially negative consequences of full-on combat. You mentioned, I had a journalist friend of mine say something similar to me this week, by the way. He said, very wise man with much experience, he said he believes that we're entering the most difficult phase of this conflict. And you alluded to something similar. Why did that idea make itself present to you? And why do you regard that as an accurate summation of what's happening?
I think it's difficult. As an actor, you're trained, a tiny part of your brain is trained. It's such a small part of your brain. It's to be present and to remember at the same time. So it's a tiny part of your brain in conflict. And that creates a sense of, I can see something's happening. And actually, it came to me by realizing, sitting in court, when you put this ideology to reason, to cold scrutiny, to proper and rigorous inquiry, it has nowhere to go. It has nowhere to run. It can't survive a conversation. None of it can survive a conversation. And you notice that as, you know, these little sparks that appear in society, like anti-Semitism and people feeling that they can identify totally as their own little crowd group in Britain, you think that people are beginning to run out of patience. And they're just signs. And I think Peter Boghossian put it really, really well. He said, this is coming to an end, and everyone is going to say that they never played part. And I suppose in a sort of roundabout and rather stupid way, I'm trying to say I can tell it's coming to an end. I can just see it coming to an end. And I know it's coming to an end because it doesn't make any sense. And nature abhors a vacuum. And we've had a vacuum now for a very, very long time.
Okay, so I'll play devil's advocate there again. So I talk frequently with both Jonathan Pageau, who's been a cardinal player in this ARC enterprise, who's a very wise person, and with Michael Mellis. They're quite different people because Pageau is a icon carver and a deep Christian, trained as well in the postmodern ethos, so he understands both sides of the argument. And Michael Mellis is kind of a libertarian anarchist, but both of them both of them believe that we're not going to get through this bout of ideological conflict without some really serious trouble. And my sense is more agnostic. I believe that the future isn't written in blood, and that if we conducted ourselves wisely, we could have a virtual apocalypse, let's say, instead of the real thing, that we could work this out in the realm of ideas. We could tilt ourselves back on the upward path without the kind of mayhem that sometimes accompanies a transformation of ideology. Now, there's some precedent for this. Obviously, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that was much less bloody than we had any right to hope or expect. So, but then I'm really torn about this because I look at the universities and I think, oh my God, you guys are so far gone that nothing but your total collapse is going to bring about a transformation. And when I start thinking that that's a rather pessimistic view, something like what happened in Washington happens, and you get the president of MIT and Harvard and UPenn, all three woefully underqualified for the job, come out and say in unison something so utterly blood-curdling and preposterous that it's surreal. You think, well, it's a long ways yet to the bottom. And so you think it's going to come, you think you intimated that you believe that this is going to come to an end. I don't have any vision of how things are going to lay themselves out over the next few years. I can't predict it. And so, but you said you have a sense. I can see, look, I put up 5 YouTube videos last year that were all critical of the climate narrative. And basically nothing happened to me as a consequence. YouTube put up a few warnings, that like they always do about how climate change is this ultimate catastrophe, but they left them alone. And almost all the comments were positive. And certainly the climate catastrophe narrative has taken a vicious hit in the last year. And people are pretty tired of the trans stupidity. So, but then you see the depth of corruption in places like the universities, and you think, oh my God, how much trouble is there going to have to be before sanity does prevail?
I suppose what gives you a sense that things are going to change. I was quite affected by something that you said quite early on. And weirdly, my dad, who broke the car, like he slammed the brakes on in the car when I was about 8 years old, and he went, postmodernism is evil. And I was like, well, I didn't understand, but I could just remember it. And he was obviously listening to the BBC or something. And you said this thing quite early on, and Dad actually introduced all of us to you, to varying degrees of love, let's put it that way. and one of the things that I thought was this idea that you raised, which was when this thing is overthrown, what comes? A sort of Hitlerian figure comes, doesn't he, out of the Weimar, which is, Victor Davis Hanson talks about how we're in this sort of leisured, affluent Weimar period. And from that comes a Hitlerian figure. And one of the greatest things that I think about Britain, and John Anderson said this to me as well when he spoke, he said, when things get really, really bad, people are going to look at Britain. They're going to look to Britain and they're going to look at your legal system and we're going to look at the way that you've been going around. You know, you've reformed, you've unreformed, you've reversed revolutions, you've done all this stuff. And I think that there is, within the English patience, the fundamental English patience, there's a real stoic solidness to it. And I think that that's what will ultimately end this period. That we cannot have, people are now openly laughing at the way universities are talked about in the UK. Anyone who is vaguely awake is turning around and saying, you know, don't send your kids to universities. We do what we do via the Bad Law Project to challenge the government over certainly stuff that they're teaching in schools. And I think a sort of bloodless coup is possible, but part of me is like, this is going to end violently, but it might end violently. It might end violently in a good way, for want of a better word, which is that they get so upset and so angry and so annoyed that no one is listening to them and that British people still want to protect their culture and not have it diluted and stuff like that, that there's a big riot. We've already seen what's going on in London over the last 3 weeks, and Britain just galvanizes itself. And we're very tough like that. And that gives me some hope. Admittedly, it's fleeting often, but it does give me some, it gives me hope that it can be. How quickly was McCarthyism, they just said go, didn't they? It was just like goodbye, out. You know, and I think that something similar might happen.